On Halloween night 3 years ago, I got teased in a weird way. I'm Grace, and my family's just my parents and my twin brothers. It was Halloween night. I got back from my best friend's place, and the house was totally empty. There was a note from my mom on the dining table. "We will be at Mr. White's party, and we'll be back late. Handle dinner yourself. Do whatever you want. Go trick-or-treating with your brothers, or maybe come to the party with us." After reading my mom's ideas for a fun Halloween, I decided to just stay home. I wasn't into Halloween. No clue why. Was anyone else like that? I locked the door, hung the key in the usual spot, and went to my room to change. As I was buttoning my PJs, I noticed another note on my desk. "Someone's in the house." I frowned and let out a tired sigh. "Leon, Logan, are you two messing around again?" I was pretty sure about it, since I was no stranger to my two little brothers' pranks. I told them, "If you two even touch my stuff, you're dead for sure," while I threw a little boxing move to warn them. Then I crumpled up the note, tossed it in the trash, and headed downstairs to make dinner. When I opened the cupboard to grab some veggies and bacon for a salad, I found another note stuck in there. I read it in a sarcastic tone like, "It's just you and me here. Enough, you two. This isn't funny at all. Come out here before I really lose my patience." All I got in response to my annoyance was silence. "You two brats," I muttered as I walked toward the door, knowing they must have snuck back into the house again. When I turned the doorknob, it was still locked. I turned back to where the key was hanging, but it was gone. I almost missed another note that was stuck on the door. "You can't run." "Leon, Logan, I'm saying it for the last time. Get out here now," I yelled, really mad at those two kids as I kicked the door hard. I ran into the living room, and the bag with my phone was gone too. "What the heck is this?" I said, feeling annoyed, helpless, and a bit confused. "Look at the ceiling." The note on the table made me shake, and my heart was racing. I took a deep breath, looked up slowly, and then just screamed. On the ceiling was Nana, my cat, with a knife stuck in her chest, like she was nailed up there. "Leon, Logan!" I burst into tears and ran upstairs screaming. I ran to the landline, crying and praying, and quickly dialed my mom's number. But it was quiet. The phone line was cut, and I was trapped in my own house. "Oh my God, please tell me this is just a prank." I was seriously scared and panicking. I dashed into my little sibling's room, hoping to find something, but it was all quiet. I cried even louder. I ran back to my room and locked the door tight. In a situation like this, I gotta stay really calm, I muttered to myself, my hands ready to rip my hair out. My heart skipped a beat when I spotted another note on the table in the distance. "You're exactly where I want you." I covered my mouth, trying not to cry out loud, and everything started to blur in front of me. I looked around the room and then spotted the laptop. I grabbed it quick and shot a message to my best friend. "This is serious. I'm not joking. Call police ASAP. Someone broke into my house." All I could do was hide in the corner, crying and praying like crazy. About 10 minutes later, I heard the police sirens and jumped up, rushing downstairs. I was crying and going on about all the awful stuff I'd just been through. My parents and little brothers got home about 20 minutes later. After almost an hour of checking every nook and cranny of the house, the police still couldn't find anything weird. "Grace, behind you," Mom shouted in a panic. I was so close. "Trick or treat." That was what the note stuck to my back said. It had been almost 2 weeks since Halloween, but I still couldn't shake off the creepy vibe from that night. I had to skip school to see a shrink with my mom, and I needed someone with me the whole time. I couldn't skip school anymore, so my parents and little brothers really tried to cheer me up. Going back to school after almost a month, I was super tired, and my face looked all worn out. On top of that, I got hit with a bunch of bad news. Lucy, my best friend, was taking over my cheerleading captain spot. Devlin, my boyfriend, also said goodbye and started hanging out with Lucy. Under the desk, there was another note that said, "You're now in the situation I wanted." Now I got what Lucy's smile meant that morning. I was once paid a huge sum of money to keep quiet about something. The case once caused a stir throughout the entire state, but as the years have passed, it has gradually cooled down. Nobody has been able to find or gather any information about me through this Reddit account either, so I decided to share my story in the hope of easing some of the burden in my heart. It was a winter night 2 years ago. I'm walking home after spending 2 full days enjoying myself with all my energy and mind at my best friend's house. The reason I chose to walk home at that time is something I'm not sure about. At that time, I wasn't completely sober from the alcohol, and my steps were still unsteady. And then I took a wrong turn, as if it were fate's design, leading me to a different direction in life. Standing in the middle of the deserted street, I widened my eyes, hoping that I would recognize where I was. But the more I looked, the more everything seemed unfamiliar. How could I not know this road, even though I have lived here for nearly 8 years? Seeing a car parked not far away with its lights still on, I decided to run over and ask for directions. From the car, a huge white bear stepped out. To be precise, it was a person wearing a bear mascot costume. The white bear walked over to the passenger seat, opened the car door, and roughly grabbed a girl by her hair, dragging her out of the car. At first, I found it quite amusing, guessing that someone was recording a funny video, since that trend was popular at the time. The girl tried to get up and run away, but she was quickly grabbed by the white bear and was struck repeatedly with powerful slaps. Without stopping, as the girl crumbled to the ground, the white bear pulled out a gun and pointed it straight at her head. "If you want to die..." It was a man gritting his teeth and speaking in a harsh tone. The man continued to use a rope to tie her hands and feet, then shoved her into the trunk of the car and firmly shut it. Under the influence of alcohol, I laughed in delight and clapped, walking over to the man. "That was quite a performance, buddy." He immediately moved towards me, the gun aimed at my forehead. At this moment, I was skeptical about what was happening, not daring to move, raising both hands in a surrendering gesture. The man pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and shone it directly into my face, illuminating every detail.
"Consider this as if you don't know anything, all right?"
I nodded. All I could observe from him were his eyes with 2 different colors, brown and blue. The man shoved me hard, causing me to fall to the ground, and then turned away and left. "She won't die, right?" I got up and asked him with a bravery I didn't quite understand where it came from. The man turned back and looked at me with a displeased expression before driving away. I wandered for a while and found a convenience store where I drank a few sips of cold water to wake myself up. Looking back on what just happened, I still can't tell if it was a dream or reality. The next morning, I woke up to find it past noon. My whole body was sore, and I could still feel the effects of the alcohol. I turned on the TV while having my meal, and the news reported information and images about the disappearance of a young girl. Remembering the incident I witnessed the night before, I was now sober enough to reflect on everything. I quickly grabbed my phone with the intention of reporting to the police, but noticed the money added to my account 8 hours ago. Remember what I told you? I hesitated, afraid of the consequences, as the man had clearly found out about me. I struggled for a long time. The money had shaken my resolve. I know that it is truly despicable and abhorrent. I followed every news update about the missing girl. There were no traces left, and no body was found, so she might still be alive. I have been living in torment and fear all this time. I sent the money I received to children's and animal rescue organizations. But hiding a dark secret has never been easy or lighthearted. It has greatly affected my life. Yesterday, while walking down the street with a friend, I came across a man with 2 different colored eyes, one blue and one brown. His gloomy and cold gaze seemed to fixate on me. A flurry of thoughts raced through my mind, and I could no longer hear any sounds. My face turned pale, and I could feel my mouth going dry as I was breathing heavily. When I got home, I picked up the phone to dial the police, but when the operator's voice came on, my throat went dry. What should I say?
Hello?
And how do I explain it to them so they understand? I am very scared, feeling helpless and desperate about my own stupidity and cowardice. Is my silence the right action? Or is it a selfish act that deserves to be punished and paid for? I found out that my grandfather, my dad, and the devil were actually the same person. I'm Melvin, and I'm 17. I've lived with my grandparents and Aunt Sam since I was little, and I've never met my parents. I've always felt loved by my grandmother and Aunt Sam, but not by my grandfather. I feel like there's always been a gap between me and my grandfather that just can't be closed. He's never really shown me any words of care or loving gestures. When I was 10, I used to run home from the bus stop all excited. The sound of kids crying left me feeling really confused. When I walked into the living room, I saw my grandmother holding a baby wrapped in a blanket, and she was crying too. "Come here, Melvin. This is your little brother, Henry." I was really curious. As a 10-year-old, I had a lot of questions, like why I suddenly had a younger brother, and whether he was born by our mother, Carrie.
You're not allowed to ask questions that go against any instructions from adults.
My grandfather's voice sounded really annoyed when he heard my questions. Aunt Sam quickly pulled me over to see my brother, but I was in tears because I felt sorry for myself and didn't really feel anything for Henry. I stayed in the room that my grandmother said was my mom's room, and Henry stayed with my grandparents since he was too young. I asked my grandmother about my parents many times, but she just smiled with a red, tearful face. My grandmother always told me to keep the room just as it was, down to the smallest details. The picture showed a very young and beautiful woman, and my grandmother said that that was my mother, Carrie. I don't have any information about my father, and neither do my grandparents. I don't share many traits with my mother, but resemble my grandfather more, and I really don't like that. I've had insomnia since I was a kid, probably around 7 or 8 years old, because of all the different noises. Sometimes it was the laughter of kids, and other times it was the crying and scolding. I could never quite pinpoint where it was coming from. I told my grandmother everything because she always listened to me.
Stop making up stories and asking for things.
My grandfather's voice sounded annoyed when he overheard me telling my grandmother that the room needed better soundproofing. My grandmother didn't have much of a say in the house because she didn't work. The whole family relied on my grandfather's salary for all the expenses. I saw my grandfather get angry with her many times, even throwing away the dinner she had just made because she mentioned my mother. She wanted him to spend some money to hire a detective to find my mother, Carrie. My grandfather didn't seem to care about my mother, so I could kind of understand why he didn't show much love for my siblings and me. Because I was really afraid of my grandfather and didn't want to cause any trouble for my grandmother, I tried to put up with those noises for many years. Sometimes, hearing the laughter of the kids made me laugh too. I also have a younger brother, Henry, but we always had to follow my grandfather's strict rules, so we were all pretty closed off. As I grew up, I always planned to visit my mother and ask her why she didn't bring my brothers and me along, or why she never came to visit us. One day, the family dinner took a serious turn when my grandfather announced that he was at risk of losing his job. At night, I heard the two adults arguing about money and some illness, along with the sound of a child crying. I put a pillow over my ears, but I couldn't block out the annoying noise. It sounds like it's Grandpa. I sat up and walked around the room, trying to find a spot where I could hear the noise as clearly as possible. The woman's scream was really loud, and then the argument stopped. I had a lot of doubt about the man's voice. For almost a week now, the noise I've been hearing every night is a mix of a child crying and a woman's soothing voice. Of course I can't sleep. The child's crying might mean they're uncomfortable or sick. I know this from seeing my grandmother take care of Henry when he was little. She gently held Henry, comforted him, and sang him a lullaby with a worried and tired expression. A noise that sounded like a door opening came from right outside. I quietly went to open the door, and it was my grandfather. He must be thirsty. I figured that since there was a bathroom in my grandparents' bedroom, he wouldn't use the one in the living room. I followed him down to the living room, and instead of turning right to go to the kitchen, my grandfather turned left. I kept a safe distance so he wouldn't notice me and kept following him. My grandfather went into the basement. I waited until he was inside, then I hurriedly followed him. But by the time I got to the basement, my grandfather had disappeared. I walked around looking for him but couldn't find him, and I started wondering if I was dreaming. I decided to sit in a hidden corner and wait, and eventually I fell asleep. The sound like a lock made me jump awake. I was surprised when my grandfather appeared out of nowhere and left the basement. I didn't tell my grandmother, but decided to keep an eye on my grandfather for a few more days. For the next 3 days, my grandfather didn't do anything out of the ordinary and didn't go to the basement again. I was tormented by the sound of a little girl crying and the woman's constant cursing. In her scolding and cursing, she mentioned Mark, my grandfather. I grew more and more curious about my grandfather and was sure he was hiding some kind of secret. On the fourth night, I saw my grandpa pulling back a shelf in the basement, and it opened up to another basement behind it. While I was still in shock, my grandpa led a woman holding a little girl, and they both ran out of the basement in a hurry. The woman's face looked a lot like my mom's. I didn't really react, and I'm not sure what I was feeling at that moment. I just stayed in that corner of the basement until the next morning. The police, along with my grandparents, Aunt Sam, and the woman who looked like my mom, came back. With the police urging him on, my grandpa reopened the door to the other basement. 4 more people came out one by one, all calling the woman Mom and my grandpa Dad. My grandmother immediately collapsed and gasped. I ran over to hug her, and everyone was surprised. The strange woman looked at me, burst into tears, and called my name. The whole truth about my parents, the 2 people I had been longing to see for 17 years, was finally revealed. The noises I heard every night were from my mom and my siblings, who had been living in a dark, cramped basement. My mom had been imprisoned for 24 years by her own father, someone I didn't know whether to call Dad or Grandpa. I had 7 siblings in total. It should have been 8, but one of them died because my mom was abused while she was 7 months pregnant. My grandfather took Henry and me upstairs because the basement was too cramped and told us that my mom had abandoned us. I can't forgive the person who committed this terrible crime, but he did create my 7 siblings. Mother Carrie endured extreme physical and mental pain. Even though she hated the person who took away her future and happiness, she always said that she loved and protected all of us at all costs. I love my mom and my other siblings a lot, for I'm the lucky one. I've decided to move on and live a new, happy life with my grandmother, Mother Carrie, Aunt Sam, and my 6 siblings. But I never stopped wondering why my grandfather did such horrible things to his own daughter. The story is based on a real-life event about the tragic life of a girl named Elizabeth Fritzl. Her real dad is Joseph Fritzl, a messed up, creepy guy. He started abusing his daughter Elizabeth when she was just 11. When Elizabeth was growing up, she tried to run away from her monster of a dad a bunch of times, but it never worked. For 7 years, starting when Elizabeth was 11, Joseph started working on turning the basement into a prison. On August 28, 1984, when Elizabeth was only 18, he drugged her and locked her up in the dark basement. He raped her every day, and after 24 years, Elizabeth had 7 kids with him, going through unimaginable pain and humiliation. In April 2008, Joseph finally let his oldest daughter, Kristen, who was really sick, go to the hospital. From there, the truth came out, and the whole world saw the face of a monster. I nearly got myself killed on my 19th birthday because I was being totally reckless. I am James, 30 years old. My scary experience went down 11 years ago. For my 19th birthday, I grabbed my 2 best buddies, Jim and Julian, and we decided to check out this old abandoned campsite in the woods. We decided to start exploring around 10 p.m. and figured we'd wrap it up before midnight to celebrate my birthday. With my immature mindset back then, I was super pumped, thinking this trip was going to be an awesome adventure and make me feel cooler than ever. The reason I knew about this campsite was because I went there when I was a kid. I came back there the week before and found out it was totally abandoned. That's why I wanted to check it out again. But I didn't expect it to be such a bad idea. After dinner, my 2 friends and I drove out to the campsite. Since we were all on the same page with our thoughts, opinions, and interests, we were totally pumped for the challenge we'd set up, laughing and chatting the whole way. About a mile from the campsite, we had to stop the car because a wood log was blocking the road. When we got out of the car to see what was up, we saw that the wooden beam had private area carved into it. I swear I didn't see this when I came here last week. I was quite surprised. Jim and Julian were really intrigued and even more curious. Just a few steps from the wooden beam, there was a triangular warning sign. We shined our flashlights on it and read, "Beware of dangerous dog." Jim suddenly burst out laughing and said, "What a joke!" Julian and I were a bit surprised at first, but then we got interested. We decided to leave the car and just walk into the campsite. Jim was walking around with his flashlight, and I had my phone out to record the whole cool adventure. We ventured deep into the forest, but before we got too far, we started hearing dogs barking in the dark. We stopped and exchanged glances. I whispered, "There really are dogs." Julian was pretty sure, saying, "I bet there's not just one, but at least 3. Our reckless curiosity made us more excited than scared, so we decided to push on further. We'd barely taken a few steps when a woman's loud scream freaked all 3 of us out. The scream was both angry and sad, and it was really haunting. "Turn off the lights," Jim whispered, and Julie and I instantly followed his lead. I could hear my heart pounding really hard. "What the heck is wrong with her?" I said. The scream stopped, so we waited a few more minutes, then turned the lights back on and kept going. The vibe got really tense, so we stopped talking and just stayed quiet. Out of nowhere, the woman's scream came back, this time way louder, like she had moved closer. We looked at each other, totally confused, turned off all the flashlights again, and just stood there listening. About 2 minutes later, we saw another flashlight shining from the other side. Not being able to make out who was in front of us, we just stood there in a daze, waiting for them to get closer. Jim turned on the flashlight, aimed it at the person, and said, "Hi." But what we saw froze all 3 of us in place. It was a woman in a white dress. No clue who she was. But what really freaked us out was the big axe she was holding tight and pointing right at us. We turned around and bolted as fast as we could, using every bit of alertness and speed we had left. As we ran, we screamed for our moms and for God. The woman was super fast. She chased after us and yelled, "I'll kill all of you, you assholes!" We ran in a panic and got separated in the dark. After running for a bit, I turned off the flashlight, hid in the bushes, and kept praying. Hearing Jim's scared screams and the dog barking, my heart just sank. With my hands shaking, I grabbed my phone to call the cops, but it felt like it was weighing a ton. After waiting 10 minutes, which felt like forever, I finally heard a police siren. I couldn't get up or move because I was too scared that danger was still out there. "Is anyone here?" a police officer called out loudly. I quickly turned on the flashlight to signal him, and they took me back to the car. When I saw Jim, my best friend, covered in cuts and bruises, I started crying. Julian was lucky to be okay, but he was totally crushed. The crazy woman kept screaming and fighting the cops, and it took 3 people to take her down. That night we were taken to the hospital. Jim had to be rushed to the ER because of blood loss, and Julian and I just got a general checkup. The next morning, once we were feeling a bit better, Julian and I were called into the police station to give our side of the story. After checking out the abandoned campsite, the cops found a bunch of stuff used for pagan rituals, 4 German mastiffs, and a lot of animal carcasses. The woman was arrested, and they started looking into it further. It took Jim 3 months to bounce back, both physically and mentally. We haven't done any more wild challenges since then, and we've realized that being reckless is like messing with your own safety and life. This story is based on a real event involving a Belgian YouTuber's experience. On December 29th, 2023, he and 2 friends drove into the forest to check out an old abandoned campsite. Their recklessness almost got them into serious trouble. and it ended up being a huge psychological shock. The notes and diary I found in the forest led to one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had. I'm Benny, 35 years old. I love traveling to different places, discovering new things, and documenting it all. I have a YouTube channel where I share my real experiences with people who have the same interests. Over time, my hobby turned into a passion, and it even started helping me make some extra money. Last fall, I took a trip to explore a forest that's about a 4-hour drive from where I live. I planned to stay in the forest for a night or two and brought all the gear I needed. By the time I got to the forest, it was already late afternoon. There was still a bit of weak sunlight, just enough for me to look around and find a spot to settle for the night. The forest wasn't super wild or dense. From what I could tell, a lot of people had been there to explore before. I saw names carved into the trees, along with some water bottles, plastic bags, and leftover fast food boxes. As I ventured further into the forest, I spotted a few interesting things under a white oak tree. There were scraps of paper wedged with small stones at both ends, and they had personal notes written on them. The water bottles and flat stones were covered with song lyrics, and there were a ton of them. I felt curious and a bit intrigued, so I skimmed through everything that was written. The handwriting was kind of scribbled. There were a few cigarette butts left behind, so I figured this must have been a guy. The scene was pretty fresh. The pieces of paper were still white, and the handwriting hadn't been damaged by rain or dew. He must have left not too long ago. While looking around, I found another bag under the tree next to me. Inside was a thick red liquid, mixed with some chunks that I couldn't tell if they were meat or something else. A smell of decay hit me, and I thought it was coming from the stuff in the bag, until I saw a duck head with a long neck, decomposing right next to it. An electronic device was in pretty bad shape. I figured it had been smashed with a lot of force. At first, I thought it was a smartwatch, but when I tried it on, it was way too big for my wrist. For a moment, I thought of a device used to track the behavior of prisoners after they're released. It's worn on the ankle. I tried it on and it fit my ankle perfectly. I found another notebook a few steps away, picked it up, and saw that it was in perfect condition. It was getting dark really fast, and the rustling sound of dry leaves startled me. I quickly left before I ran into any other dangerous animals. I found the perfect spot to spend the night, a small wooden house. After checking, I didn't find any belongings or items left behind by the previous person. I took out my stuff and started getting dinner ready with confidence. After I finished eating, I pulled out the notebook I'd picked up earlier to read. A notebook looked pretty ordinary on the outside and didn't have the owner's name on it. As I flipped through the first pages, there were scribbles and a few random sentences about life. Mike Jones, prisoner at San Quentin State Prison, released on May 30th. Reading that, I immediately felt a shiver. I knew this Mike. He was reported by the media and police in California to have died over a month ago, right after getting a 15-year prison sentence. He was a pervert with 13 charges, including violence, theft, and attempted murder, but he didn't succeed. Mike talked about what happened during his sentence, how he was beaten by other inmates, and how many times he tried to end his life, but failed. My nerves were on edge when I realized the handwriting in this notebook was similar to the handwriting on the pieces of paper and plastic bottles from earlier that day. So, I had accidentally wandered into the territory of a dangerous person. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and I was startled. My heart was pounding like crazy. I didn't answer or open the door. I just sat quietly, listening and waiting to see what would happen. After about 10 minutes, I slowly opened the door and looked outside, but no one was there. On the ground was a plastic bottle with a note that said, "Get out of here now. I saw you." I had just received a threat and a warning. It wasn't clear if that person was Mike Jones or not, but who knows what they might do next. On top of that, I don't have any weapons to defend myself. I quickly packed up my stuff and left the forest that night. I hoped I wouldn't run into any more trouble. Luckily, I got out of the forest safely and found a motel to stay in. Right after that, I called the police to report everything I'd found and sent them the video I had recorded. The next morning, I drove back home. That afternoon, I saw on the news that Mike Jones had been found and arrested by the police. He was sent back to prison because of his defiant behavior. Since then, I haven't had the guts to explore the forest again. It's a place with a lot of cool things to experience, but there are also potential dangers that can be hard to handle. The story is based on a true event about a YouTuber's scary camping trip. He really loves nature and has a passion for exploring new places. He recorded his trips and experiences and shared them on YouTube for people who have the same passion. After that scary evening, the young man gained a new perspective and learned to be more careful and alert on future trips. "Mommy, can a child live in a trash can?" That was an innocent question from my son, but it haunted me ever since I learned the story of a monstrous mother. I am a single mother living with my 5-year-old son in a small neighborhood. Everyone here is very friendly, except for the house right next to mine. I found out that the owner of that house is also a single mother named Hebe, with 5 young children, 4 daughters and a youngest son, who is the same age as my son. She was described by the neighbors as someone with a selfish lifestyle. I met her a few times, but my greetings were ignored and met with a very cold attitude. Several times, loud arguments could be heard coming from Hebe's house at night between her and another man. I guessed that he was the father of one of her 5 children, as they did not resemble each other. One day, I was busy preparing dinner in the kitchen and left my son to play alone in the living room. A moment later, the boy ran over and hugged my leg, saying, "Mommy." I replied to my son while still focusing on cooking, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "Mom, can a child live in a trash can?" My son's innocent question made me laugh. If there are a lot of ugly bacteria, why would you want to live in there? I don't want to, but the boy next door does. Then you should advise your friend not to do that. I brushed off my son's question and quickly finished making dinner. After dinner, I worked while my son watched TV. When I glanced at my son, I was a bit surprised to see him watching images of trash cans. "Honey, what are you watching?" The boy didn't respond. His face was very pensive, and his eyes were fixed on the TV screen. "Are you trying to learn about something?" Being inside there must be really cramped, and there are no candles, toys, or even a TV, Mom. My son's voice was very sad. "Who are you talking about?" "It is about the friend from next door." "There's no way that would happen, Mikey. Every baby deserves to be loved." I smiled, knowing my little boy had grown and had the sensitivity of a 5-year-old. I took my son to his room, kissed him goodnight, and then returned to my own room. I didn't go to sleep right away. I finished up some work first. About 10 minutes later, my son cried out loudly in a panic. I didn't have time to react before the boy opened the door, ran to me, and hugged me tightly while crying a lot. "Mom, please save him. He'll be hungry in the trash can." I look at my son in shock. I didn't rush to ask my son questions. Instead, I comforted him first. Once my son calmed down, he recounted everything that had happened. From losing his ball in the neighbor's backyard, he had planned to run in quickly and come back since no one was around. I picked up a plastic bottle in the yard and threw it in the trash can, just as you told me. I saw him in the trash can. Hearing my son's story left me in shock and made me shudder. I immediately called the police because I was sure my son wasn't lying. From the information I gathered, the police had to visit Hebe's house 3 times before uncovering the horrifying truth. She denied having a son, constantly crying and pretending to be pitiful. In the shed in Hebe's backyard, the police found a trash can containing the body of her youngest son. Hebe took advantage of her sad circumstances to register for government assistance using her son's information. Hebe's children were very unfortunate as they received no care or attention from their own mother. Her youngest son died from a high fever that led to seizures and brain damage. After learning of her son's death, she didn't obtain a death certificate or bury him properly, and she didn't seem to grieve at all. Her selfishness and greed were even more disgusting as Hebe continued to use her son's information to receive monthly benefits. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, but her cold-bloodedness and insensitivity deserved to be locked up forever. It was heartbreaking for the little boy. That innocent soul deserved protection and love instead of being abandoned like that. How could a mother not love her own child? Did she really deserve to be called mom by her 5 children? This story is based on a true event that occurred in Rock Island, Illinois on July 25th, 2023. The police received the tip-off from a neighbor who claimed that the woman next door was hiding the long-dead body of her son in her home. It took a long time for the police to uncover the truth about a selfish, irresponsible mother and her unfortunate little boy. Hello, how may I help you? Please help me. I just shot a man. Could you please explain the situation further? My wife was just attacked by him. Please come here and help me. Do you need ambulance, fire truck, or police car? Yes, I need everything. That was the phone call received at 10 p.m. at our police station. I'm William, 47 years old, working as a police officer in Ohio. That evening, I was on duty with 2 colleagues. We received a report of a serious assault at a residence about 15 kilometers from the station. Immediately, myself and another colleague moved to that house. Upon arrival, the scene inside the house left us stunned. Under the floor, a man and a woman lay apart from each other. The woman had been attacked, her head severely disfigured. The man had 3 gunshot wounds to his forehead, blood still flowing. Bloodstains covered the floor and walls, yet to dry. The room was in disarray. A man around 40 years old sat on the sofa, holding a trembling and crying little girl about 6 years old. He wore a blood-stained sweatshirt, and his right arm was deeply torn. That was Henry, the husband of the attacked woman, and the one who had called the police. The medical staff began assessing the condition of Henry's wife and the other man. I asked Henry questions to gather information while my colleague observed the scene. Henry was visibly panicked when he saw us arrive. He kept asking if his wife was okay and begged the medical staff to save her. We tried to reassure Henry, promising to do our best, but looking at the grim reality, we knew both his wife and the other man were already dead. After Henry calmed down, he painfully recounted the whole story. Henry's family had a small gym in the basement. That Sunday afternoon, Henry was working out on the treadmill down in the basement. Suddenly, there was a loud noise on the roof. Henry rushed upstairs and called out his wife Martha's name, but she didn't respond. Entering the bedroom, Henry didn't find his wife anywhere, only his 6-year-old daughter lying on the bed. As Henry stepped into the living room, he was suddenly attacked by a man wielding a dirty axe. Reacting quickly, Henry managed to dodge, and the axe swung down hard onto his right arm. After assessing the situation, Henry hastily retrieved the gun hidden in the drawer and fired 3 shots into the man's forehead in self-defense. Then he saw his wife lying on the floor with a horrified expression. Henry immediately called the police. Henry told us that the man who attacked his wife was named Isaac. I was surprised and asked how he knew the name of the man. Henry said that Isaac had harassed Martha several times before. The man named Isaac, 35 years old, lived in a mobile home and had no relatives other than his girlfriend who lived with him. As Martha's body was being taken away, I noticed that the couple's daughter kept screaming and looking at Henry with hatred in her eyes. The girl seemed like she wanted to run towards us and say something, but was restrained by Henry. He tightly held onto her arm, glaring at her fiercely. But I soon forgot about this detail as I focused on the case. The investigation into Isaac's background revealed prior allegations of domestic violence against women. Everything seemed clear-cut, yet the perpetrator was already deceased and the case was swiftly resolved. Henry was also acquitted of the murder charge on grounds of self-defense. However, Henry didn't stop there. He kept demanding justice, insisting that Isaac pay for taking Martha's life. Henry was seemingly deeply distraught over his wife's death, leading to some unusual actions. It was a swift but haunting case for me. Until 6 months after the case was closed, the police department received a phone call from a mysterious woman claiming to be a friend of Martha. She said she wanted to report the real murderer in Martha's case from 6 months prior. Immediately, arrangements were made for her to come to the police station and provide her statement. The girl was Keva. Keva asserted that the person who killed Martha was Henry, Martha's husband. Keva confessed that she and Henry had an affair while Martha was still alive. Henry planned to kill his wife and take possession of Martha's considerable wealth. He secretly investigated and discovered that Martha was having an affair. The daughter he cherished so much was actually the daughter of his wife and her lover. Henry shared his plan with Keva, hoping she would cooperate with him, but Keva adamantly refused. After being rejected by Keva, Henry shifted his focus to the man Isaac to manipulate him and frame him for the crime. Henry's plan unfolded perfectly according to what he had calculated. After Martha's death, he sold the house and bought a new one, living comfortably with the money he inherited from his wife. Keva revealed that she had wronged Martha by being involved with Henry. However, her conscience would never allow her to commit murder. Keva underwent psychological treatment for many months to be able to speak the truth. She urged us to quickly apprehend Henry because he might harm Martha's daughter. We arrived at the address provided by Keva and witnessed Martha's daughter being abused by a strange woman. The girl, with a face resembling her late mother's, cried loudly and begged for forgiveness from the unknown woman. Shortly after, Henry returned home and appeared shocked to see us. The cold-blooded man was living off the money of his deceased wife, along with his lover, who was 20 years younger than him. The case was reinvestigated, and Henry was sentenced to death for the first-degree murder. His accomplice received a 7-year prison sentence for child abuse. After everything, the one who suffered the most severe damage was still Martha's daughter. We were sitting around eating, drinking, and chatting happily on a corpse. I'm Bradley, a senior majoring in marketing at Stanford. Our group of 5 has been tight since freshman year. Me, Steve, Joe, Naomi, and Jenny. We were all really proud to be the top students in the class. Especially Jenny. She's the school beauty queen, super pretty and talented. Since it's senior year and studying is pretty tough, we'll just meet once a week. The meeting place will rotate at each person's home or apartment. 6 months ago, on a Sunday evening, that was our group's get-together before we started the stressful exam review period. The meeting was set for 8 p.m. at Steve's place. Steve's family was pretty well off, so he lives in a spacious house that his parents gave him for his 18th birthday. Everyone showed up on time, except Jenny. In the afternoon, he mentioned he'd be picking up some beer and told us not to be late. After 20 minutes of waiting, Jenny still hadn't shown up. We set the food on the table in Steve's bedroom and started chatting. We'd collect stories about studying, love, family, and more over the week and share them. More than 40 minutes after the meeting, Steve, Joe, and I swapped guys' stories. Naomi kept calling Jenny, but she still didn't answer. This girl is really like that, showing up and disappearing, coming and going all over the place. An hour had passed. The food on the table was a mess, and the stories were starting to dwindle. We had a few minutes of silence, each of us holding our phones. The power went out suddenly, so we grabbed our phones and turned on the flashlights. The room felt a bit eerie with the dim light. Everyone's faces looked half in shadow and half lit, and their expressions were pretty tense. Joe suddenly burst out laughing.
Are you scared? There are 4 of us here.
5 people, Steve muttered, but it was loud enough for all of us to hear. I mean, Jenny hasn't come. Steve looked a bit embarrassed, and we all exchanged smiles. We all knew Steve had a crush on Jenny for ages, but he never had the guts to say anything. Joe came up with a new idea. Each person would share a ghost story. I agreed. The spooky atmosphere made the ghost stories way more interesting. First up was Naomi. She told a story about a young guy who delivered pizza. When he got to the address, his friends jumped out and scared him. He was so scared that he had a heart attack and almost died. What kind of ghost story doesn't have a bit of suspense? Joe made fun of Naomi's story, while Steve and I just laughed. It was my turn next, followed by Steve's, and Joe kept complaining that the stories were too boring. But when it was his turn, his face looked confused and scared. Joe changed the subject and started gossiping about Jenny.
A friend told me that some rich guy confessed to Jenny this afternoon.
It's not surprising that someone confessed to her. Naomi was still annoyed with Joe about what just happened and replied with a frustrated tone.
But this guy's different. I heard he's gay. He just wanted to use Jenny as a cover-up.
Joe's story was even more engaging and dramatic than the ghost stories we'd just heard. Steve looked pretty pensive. It was true. He really liked Jenny, so he wasn't thrilled to hear that story. Steve stood up and said he needed to use the bathroom and would grab a bag to collect the trash. I told Naomi to call Jenny again before we wrapped up the party, but it was still just a long ring. After a few minutes of silence, Joe came up with another trick. He asked Naomi and me to hide and scare Steve when he came back. And that's how the plan we all thought fun and perfect was born. We set Joe's phone to record Steve's reaction and hide. Steve's footsteps got louder and louder as he entered the room, and he looked around with a pretty panicked expression. Steve quickly ran over to clear all the leftover food and trash from the table and opened it up. The 3 of us stood silently watching Steve without saying anything. It turned out the table was actually a box the whole time, and we had no idea. Steve stared at the box for a long time with a worried look, before quickly turning around and leaving. As soon as he left, we showed ourselves. The 3 of us didn't say a word, just looked at each other with confused expressions before walking over to the still open box. Naomi screamed right away, her voice sounding like it was about to snap. Joe and I clung to each other tightly, like we were trying to hold on for dear life. Inside the box was Jenny, her body twisted and her blue dress almost completely red. Steve came back with a sack in one hand and a sharp knife in the other. We looked at Steve, and he looked back at us with a stiff, unblinking gaze.
I probably need to grab 3 more sacks.
Steve growled and tightened his grip on the knife. I grabbed Naomi and pushed her to run quickly, shouting at Joe to get out of the way. After a while, Joe and I managed to subdue Steve, but we both ended up with some serious cuts on our hands. Naomi cried and called the police, and they arrived just in time. Naomi, Joe, and I were stunned to find out that Steve had murdered Jenny. He was the rich guy from Joe's story. Steve had multiple personalities, one of which liked Jenny, and another that was interested in a different guy at the same time. The trauma of having his sexuality exposed and being rejected by Jenny drove him to madness. So which personality did Steve use when he was with us over the past 5 years? We had so many great memories together, and the image of a kind, warm friend was completely shattered. Our close-knit group of 5 friends had to go through such a horrific and terrible experience. Naomi was deeply affected psychologically after seeing Jenny's body. Joe also became much quieter and more cautious. But in the end, we always supported each other, prayed for Jenny, and remembered Steve. I'm Natalie, living in Queens, New York. I've been orphaned since childhood, living with my grandmother and aunt. They're the only family I've known. Since elementary school, I've been close friends with Laura, who lives just a block away from me. Laura has a similar background to mine. Her father abandoned her and her mother when Laura was 4. By the time she was 10, her mother left Laura with her grandparents and remarried. Laura and I grew up together, considering each other as sisters. I have a strong personality, while Laura is very feminine. Both of us lacking affection. We deeply cherish and support each other. When we went to college, Laura and I decided to attend the same university. By sophomore year, Laura met a guy named Kane. Kane is 2 years older than us, with a somewhat eccentric appearance. He's tall and very skinny. His pale and white skin made him look frail and delicate. His brown hair always hung long and somewhat disheveled. Kane had multiple piercings on his ears, nose, lips, chin, and eyebrows. Living alone, he never mentioned or met any of his relatives. Kane and Laura quickly fell in love after just 1 month of knowing each other. When Laura told me she had accepted Kane's confession of love, I was genuinely surprised and somewhat disappointed. I didn't like Kane. For some reason, I just didn't feel fond of him. Many times, I caught his eerie and intimidating gaze towards Laura, but I had no right to interfere in her personal life. Laura's grandmother also advised her several times to be careful and vigilant with Kane. After 3 months of dating, Laura and Kane announced their engagement, shocking everyone. Laura was so deeply in love with Kane that she brushed off the warnings. They moved to the house Kane had rented previously in the neighboring town after getting married. Laura missed out on her studies, choosing to stay home and do household chores. At first, she would often come back to visit. We went out together, and Laura would talk about married life with Kane with an extremely happy face. Seeing Laura happy, I gradually started to trust her decision. But Laura's visits gradually became less frequent. Her messages and calls to me also decreased. Even when I sent her messages for days, Laura would only reply briefly. The happy photos Laura shared with her husband on her personal account slowly turned into posts filled with hidden emotions. Once when I visited Laura, she looked visibly thinner. She led me into the house and I greeted Kane cheerfully. He responded with an extremely cold tone, not even looking at me. Kane looked at Laura with a threatening gaze. He said he had to go out for something and would be back in the afternoon. As soon as Kane left, Laura burst into tears when I asked how she was doing. She cried a lot for a long time. I hugged Laura, trying to comfort her. Although Laura didn't share anything, I knew she wasn't happy. In the following weeks, Laura kept posting images of herself on her social media. In these photos, Laura's facial features appeared familiar yet strangely different. Her eyes seemed soulless, gazing into an undefined space. What stood out was that all the photos had the same expression, no longer radiating the bright and innocent smile as before. Through these images, I noticed Laura become increasingly unfamiliar. I also noticed that the tattoo on her neck had disappeared. I wondered if that was really Laura. One evening, around 11 o'clock, I received a phone call. "Natalie, I'm scared. I just had a dream about Laura. She said she was having trouble breathing. Her face was distorted, limbs broken. I couldn't reach Laura anymore." Laura's grandmother cried and begged me to find Laura. I immediately tried to contact her, but also couldn't reach her. With a sense that something terrible had happened, I immediately reported to the local police in the town where Laura and Kane lived. When the police arrived at the house, both Laura and Kane were missing. The house was empty, devoid of any belongings. In the bedroom, they found a sex doll sitting on the bed. It looked exactly like Laura. The doll was still very new and appeared to have been cleaned before being left behind. The house was clean too, with no signs or personal belongings left behind. Through the street security cameras, the police couldn't find any trace of Laura and Kane for the past 10 days. They had vanished. Upon closer inspection of the images Laura had posted before disappearing, it wasn't Laura, but the doll that had been found. Where had they gone? The doll was sent back to Laura's grandmother by the police. She cried a lot. The doll seemed to remind her even more of Laura. Nearly a year passed, but news about Laura and Kane remained a mystery. I often visited Laura's grandmother. She cherished the doll and placed it in Laura's former bedroom, as if Laura still existed in this house. Looking at the doll, I truly wondered, what was its purpose? Why did everything in Laura's house disappear except for it? Suddenly, I noticed a part of the doll's arm seemed to be sticking out. There was something sharp inside, about to puncture the outer layer of the doll's skin. Laura's grandmother and I decided to cut open the doll's arm to see what was inside. As the knife sliced through, the doll's arm split open along a long seam. From within, a decaying human hand emerged along with the slimy silicone material. The smell of plastic and decay filled the air heavily. Laura's grandmother was in shock, clutching her chest and screaming before collapsing. I led her out of the living room and locked Laura's room, then called the police. After examination, the police determined that the body inside the sex doll was Laura's. The cause of Laura's death could not be determined. No words can describe the panic of Laura's grandmother at that moment. For the past 8 years, Kane has been on the run, with warrants issued throughout the United States and some neighboring countries. But they have never found any leads. Even his personal information is not on the national magazine. I always remember Laura, my sweet and warm-hearted girl.
I'm Erica, 26 years old, living alone in Mississippi. I don't have many relatives. I've been living with my grandparents in Florida since I was young. I don't know who my father is. As for my mother, according to my grandparents, she was swept away and disappeared in a flood when I was 4 years old. After graduating from college, I moved to Mississippi to live and work. Mississippi is one of those states in the Gulf Coast region, heavily affected by hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes. Every year, the government evacuates us to safer areas during disasters. The people here are accustomed to and quite experienced with this. Nevertheless, like everyone else living here, I love the land of Mississippi. 5 years ago, also during a relocation due to a natural disaster, the horrifying story happened, and now looking back, I still feel chills running down my spine. In February 2019, a serious flood occurred in the southern and central regions of Mississippi. There was a significant amount of rainfall, causing millions of dollars in damage and displacing over 15,000 people. My neighbors and I were among them. We were moved to an elementary school where there should be enough sleeping space for the overwhelming number of people. Upon arriving at the temporary shelter area, I called my grandparents to reassure them. We were informed that we would be here for about a week to ensure the flood would subside completely. We were no strangers to relocations like this anymore. People adapted quite easily and quickly. Each person would be provided with personal items, necessary food, and a sleeping bag. The sleeping bag was the horrifying nightmare for me after that relocation. Until now, I'm afraid of all the big zipper locking bags. After dinner and personal hygiene, we went to the classrooms to rest. I remember each classroom could accommodate a maximum of 20 people. I found a suitable spot for myself and lay down. I usually read before going to sleep. Luckily, I managed to bring the book I was reading before the relocation. Lying down reading for a while, I noticed a strange woman in the room. She was quite small, with disheveled clothes and a panicked look on her face. She kept pacing around the room, mumbling incessantly, clutching the sleeping bag tightly. I didn't pay much attention to her, continuing to read my book. After a while, when everyone had fallen asleep, I looked at my phone. It was almost midnight. I also marked my page and prepared to go to sleep. Just as I closed my eyes, I heard murmurs from someone. Despite trying to ignore it, it was very clear and close to me. I pulled the sleeping bag down and turned around. My heart seemed to stop for a few seconds. Right in front of me was the face of that woman. She had wide open eyes, staring at me and sporting a sinister smile. Her breath smelled terribly, like a corpse. Reflexively, I sat up, yelled loudly while moving back. Some people who hadn't fallen asleep heard my loud scream and immediately got up to check the situation. The room lights were turned on, and the neighbor asked me what had happened. Terrified, I pointed towards the woman, saying she was very creepy and smelled awful. But looking back, lying asleep in the sleeping bag was an old lady. I stared at her in amazement. While everyone threw me their annoying glances, everyone returned to their place, turned off the lights, and went to sleep. I moved to another corner of the room, pulled the sleeping bag high, leaving only a small hole for air to enter. My heart still hadn't returned to normal beats. After a while, still unable to sleep, I gently pulled the sleeping bag down and looked outside. The woman was lying there, looking at me, but her head was completely turned upside down compared to her body. I tightly shut my mouth, trying not to make any loud noises. I pulled the zipper off the sleeping bag to cover my body completely, trying to regulate my breathing. I closed my eyes, put on my headphones, and fell asleep without knowing when. The next morning when I woke up, the first thing I did was look around the room. The woman had disappeared. About 4 days later, everything went on as usual. I never met that woman again. People in the shelter didn't care or remember anything about her. We were all happy when the government announced that the flood had completely receded. After today, we can safely return home and resume our normal lives. That night, I don't remember how long I slept. A foul smell hit my nose, causing me to wake up in a daze. That terrible smell made me wake up immediately. I sat up, looked around. Everyone was still sleeping. Turning to the left, I saw someone lying next to me, the sleeping bag covering the entire body. My neighbor Maria was lying on the right. I shook her awake. I asked her if she smelled anything unpleasant. Maria sniffed, looked around, then said she didn't smell anything and went back to sleep. But the smell of decay was very clear. Why didn't anyone else smell it? The next morning I woke up. That foul smell was still there. It made me extremely dizzy and nauseous. Everyone was quickly packing up to go home. The person in the sleeping bag next to me still hadn't woken up. I was surprised, reached out to wake that person up. As soon as I touched the sleeping bag, a loud noise rang out, making me startle. I called out loudly a few more times, but the person inside the sleeping bag still didn't respond. I trembled, reached out to pull the zipper of the bag down. Inside the sleeping bag was a rotting corpse. I immediately screamed loudly and jumped out of control. People around came to help me calm down. I was crying and trembling, trying to tell them about the terrifying thing inside the sleeping bag. Once again, the incomprehensible looks were staring at me. A man came over, picked up the sleeping bag. A few snacks and a bottle fell out from inside. He looked at me uncomfortably, saying it was his sleeping bag and I should stop making such a fuss. I was panicked. Finally, what was going on? Why was I the only one seeing those terrifying things? On the way home, I heard the radio on the bus recounting the case of a woman. Her name was Luisa. 22 years ago, when she was 27 years old, she was a single mother who was swept away by the flood while going to pick up her 4-year-old daughter from school. Luisa's body was never found. I was stunned. My whole body was freezing cold. I remembered the horrific image of that woman. She had eyes very similar to my mother's.
I'm James, 42 years old, working as a security guard for the West Village apartment building, New York, USA. This is a small apartment building with 7 floors, a small number of residents, and a quiet place. I know a woman named Ava, 67 years old. She lives alone in an apartment on the 6th floor. Ava is reserved and prefers to observe everything around her. She has gone through many things in life. Her husband and daughter died in a car accident, and since then, Ava has lived alone. I often talk to Ava, feeling very peaceful and warm. If my mother were still alive, she would be the same age as Ava is now. One evening around 11 o'clock, I was on the night shift. Suddenly, footsteps and murmurs rang out.
6th floor, house number. 6th floor, house number.
The sound of footsteps and mumbling grew closer and closer. I startled to see the silhouette of a woman with loose hair. It turned out to be Miss Ava. She doesn't remember the house number and has been wandering around the apartment since afternoon. Ava said she asked for help from several people here, but they all ignored what Ava said. I took Ava back to her apartment and brought her some food. Recently, Ava began showing signs of Alzheimer's disease. Ava forgot what I said just a few minutes ago. Ava's illness worsened as she continued to wander and mumble every night. For about 2 days now, I haven't seen Ava anywhere. I worriedly went to Ava's apartment and rang the bell many times, but Ava didn't open the door. I called Ava and heard the bell ringing from inside the house. Feeling that something bad was going on, I immediately informed the building management, telling them to quickly open Ava's apartment. After opening the door, I and the management board went into the apartment. Everything in the apartment is still intact and tidy. There were no unusual signs. The only unusual thing was that Ava could not be found. The building's management board immediately called the police, and the footage from the camera in the apartment were also provided. The last image recorded by the camera was when Ava entered the elevator on the 3rd floor and disappeared. People in the apartment complex don't pay much attention to Ava's disappearance. The search for Ava is still ongoing. It's been 10 days since she went missing. Late that afternoon, I was informed by the people living in the 6th floor apartment that there was a fight between 2 men. I immediately ran into the elevator to go to the 6th floor. When the elevator stopped, I looked up at the display board and was startled to realize I had pressed the wrong number 5 for the floor. Before I could press the elevator to go to the 6th floor, the elevator door opened. Immediately, the stench entered my nostrils. An object immediately fell on me. I reflexively raised my hand to block it. It was Ava, to be exact. It was her body. Her face was close to mine, gray, her hair hanging down, and a terrible stench. My hands could feel her flesh melting as I held the body. I was shocked and speechless. The elevator warning sound kept ringing. I dragged Ava's body into the elevator and pressed the button to go down. The building management board and police were present to get information and scrambled the scene. And I stood looking at Ava's body for a long time. After investigating and documenting all information, the police concluded the cause of her death as follows. The 5th floor of the building was blocked by an iron door, 50 centimeters from the elevator door. The iron door was locked. Because of Alzheimer's disease, Ava mistakenly pressed the elevator to the 5th floor and not the 6th floor. Ava walked out of the elevator door before she could turn back. The elevator closed and went down. The 5th floor is an area that was acquired a few months ago, so no one goes there anymore. So she had been stuck here for the past 2 days of her disappearance and all the days of searching. The police tried standing at the location where Ava was stuck and yelled, which was clearly heard by part of the area on the 4th and 6th floors. So why didn't anyone heed Ava's plea for help? I'm Elon. I'm a high school student in Houston, Texas. I'm an open-minded individual and quite enjoy extracurricular activities at school. One time, my class was informed that they would participate in a community service cleanup session at a local park. Even though I wasn't very excited, being able to run outside was better than having to sit and study, I thought. It was Sunday morning. We arrived at the park at 9 o'clock and were assigned areas to clean. This park has just been built in recent weeks, and there are still some areas in the finishing stages. Me, Anna, and Max were assigned to clean up an area with a very large rock. It was high above my head and placed in a small flower garden. I observed the rock and saw that it had a very strange shape. There's also a cross engraved on the stone, but it seems to be upside down. I told Anna and Max, but they didn't pay attention to what I said. I guess I'm no expert in landscaping, I muttered. Ignoring the stone's strange appearance, we started cleaning. Max and Anna picked grass in the flower garden, and I will plant a few new flowers. We do this while chatting about interesting stories at school. As it neared the end, I started to smell a terrible stench. It was really nauseating. Anna and Max also noticed that unpleasant smell. We went around the area we were responsible for to find out the source, but didn't find anything unusual. At the end of the labor session, all of us were told to regroup. My team has thoroughly checked the area we are in charge of, so we are confident that everything is clean. It was probably some dead mice somewhere else, and the wind brought in the stench. We told each other that and happily left. A few days later, we organized a picnic ourselves at the park we cleaned, this time with Ethan and Mary. Returning to the flower garden the other day, we were happy because the newly planted flower trees were lush. My friends and I spread out the carpet next to it, ate together, chatted, and took pictures. About 15 minutes later, it suddenly started to rain. We quickly packed up our things and ran to a nearby shack to shelter from the rain. Where we were standing outside the rock, a brown liquid began flowing out. The stench rose again. This time it was much worse. We were stunned to see that strange thing and looked at each other, confusing and scared. About 20 minutes later, the rain stopped. Me, Max, and Ethan came closer for a better look. Mary and Anna fearfully huddled in the shack. Even though I was scared, a feeling of curiosity was taking over me. Reaching out to brush a few flower plants next to the rock away, a feeling of dizziness immediately hits me. I saw human fingers crushed under the stone and they were decomposing. I screamed out in fear, almost to a panic attack, crawled out to yell at my friends to quickly call the police. The police arrived and immediately searched the scene. Max and I stayed behind to give our statements to the police, while Ethan took Anna and Mary home first because they were so panicked. The police found out that there was a body crushed underneath and immediately sent a tow to move the stone away. Seeing the entire scene unfold, I was shocked to the core by the corpse underneath. The body was no longer in one piece. It was decomposing. The stench and sight was horrifying to witness. The police thanked Max and I for the cooperation, then told us to go home first. Maybe during construction the stone was placed in a different position and collapsed over the poor worker while he was inspecting the project. So my feeling about the stone's strange position is correct. The man's body was processed and returned to his family. That stone was later demolished by the park management board and a flower garden was planted in its place. To this day, that scene still haunts me. Extracurriculars now brings me the dreads. I always imagined that I would discover another terrible thing around there. I'm Oscar, 26 years old, living alone in New York. Because I have an online job and have free time, I often sleep during the day and then work at night. In recent months, a 7-Eleven convenience store opened near my house. I really enjoy being able to buy food at night while working. A man named David, 45 years old, is the owner of the store. David is recruiting staff and temporarily looks after this place. David designed a room at the back of the store to provide a comfortable place to rest. He was funny and kind. Sometime later, the store had another female employee. Her appearance is not very outstanding, but her way of talking attracted me. Her name is Mary, 26 years old, and she is Mr. David's niece. Gradually, I stopped by the convenience store several times a day to talk to Mary. I started to see that Mary had feelings for me. But David gradually became more grumpy every time he saw me. I guess David is upset because I'm affecting Mary's work. He met me privately and harshly asked me to stay away from Mary. David gave the reason that he did not want Mary to be in danger when getting acquainted with strangers. It's ironic that Mary is old enough to make her own decisions about her life. Of course, I didn't listen to David. Since that tense conversation, David continuously appeared at the store. It's like he's guarding Mary and I so we don't have a chance to come into contact. Many times I asked Mary out to have her own space. She happily accepted, but then always had a reason to refuse. One day I stayed up late to meet a deadline and felt hungry. I went to the convenience store. There was no one inside. I called out to David and he didn't answer. I walked around and then accidentally stopped at the door leading to the room at the back of the store. Just as I was about to approach the door, it suddenly opened loudly. Mary walked out looking haggard, her clothes disheveled. She smiled very awkwardly at me, raised her hand to close the door, not giving me a chance to look inside. I was extremely surprised to see Mary. This was not her shift. Looking at Mary's body, I still saw bruises. I asked worriedly, but she avoided my eyes and said she was fine. That night, I no longer had enough concentration and spirit to work. I always think about Mary and many questions pop up in my head. The following days, I did not see David appear again. Mary said that David had an accident and broke his leg, so he would stay home and rest for a while. Supervising and operating that store will be in charge of Mary. She will stay at the store and use David's room. Mr. David also recruited an additional employee, a middle-aged woman named Joan. Mary and I became a couple not long after. Unlike other couples, our date spot is always a convenience store. Mary never let me or Miss Joan into the back room of the store. One time, I used the restroom at the store. After draining the water, I saw something floating back. It looked like meat and had a very unpleasant smell. I guess the pipe was clogged. This must be leftover food someone had flushed down. This condition lasted for several weeks afterward. Not only the toilet, the store's drain was also clogged. I wanted to handle this for Mary, but she said she would do it herself. It's been a while since David returned to the store. Mary also did not care much for her uncle. The next strange thing is that Miss Joan also disappeared after nearly a month of working here. That day, Mary and I were at the store when the police came to investigate Miss Joan's disappearance. Mary happily cooperated and said she had resigned from the store a week before the missing information was reported. One time I went to the store looking for Mary but couldn't find her. I couldn't hold back my curiosity anymore, so I decided to enter the room at the back of the store to find her. The space inside is very stuffy and dark. I smelled clearly the smell of disinfectant and cleaning fluid. There was something in the corner of the room. I approached it and saw it was a chainsaw. Do convenience stores also use this? "What are you doing here?" Mary shouted loudly, startling me. She stood in the doorway, staring at me and full of anger. Before I could react, Mary immediately kicked me out and slammed the door. I returned home with all kinds of surprised and helpless emotions inside me. The next day, the convenience store closed. I also completely lost contact with Mary. About a week passed. I was worried and couldn't do anything. I decided to report to the police and then received a call from the police. They asked me to come to the station to cooperate in the investigation of the murder of 2 people. Strange things happened all at once. I fell into extreme confusion. The police questioned me about my connection to the woman named Mary. I replied, "She is my girlfriend." Police said she is missing and is the prime suspect for the murder. The first victim is David, who she claims is her uncle, who is actually her lover. Currently, the police have only found Mr. David's head and hands hidden in the room behind the store. They are still looking for other parts of the body. The next victim was Miss Joan. The police found her body in the same room, wrapped neatly in a very large bag with her limbs severed. Police suspect that the chainsaw in the room was the tool she used to perform the dismemberment process. I was shocked to hear the information from the police. I remembered all of Mary's strange expressions over the past time. Her carefree appearance that night. Maybe she just did something bad to Mr. David. What I saw in the toilet was most likely his flesh. Miss Jones is also likely to be murdered when she learns the horrifying truth about Mr. David. Police are still actively searching for Mary. I feel scared and disgusted that I have loved the devil all this time. I'm Dante, 46 years old. I live in Houston with my wife and 18-year-old daughter, Selena. 3 months ago, a terrible incident happened that caused us to lose our beloved Selena forever. It was a weekend evening. Around 11 p.m., I drove to pick up Selena from a birthday party. A while ago, she told me to go to Laura's birthday, Selena's best friend. I learned that Laura lives alone. That house was bought by her parents on her 18th birthday. When arriving at Laura's house, silence prevailed. I guess the party is over. I sat in the car and called Selena, but after 3 phone calls, she didn't pick up. I was worried and was about to get out of the car to ring the doorbell when Selena ran out. The girl was still wearing her party outfit, but she was wearing a baseball cap that covered her face. Selena opened the car door and sat in the back seat. I turned back to ask, but she didn't answer. I told her to get in the front seat, but Selena just sat with her head down and shook her head. The smell of alcohol was strong throughout the car. I guess she's drunk because she drank too much. I didn't say much more and started driving home. On the way home, I kept glancing through the rearview mirror in the car to see Selena's situation. While passing a Burger King store, Selena suddenly spoke. "Can I have a burger, Dad?" I was a bit surprised. She spoke with a strange voice and spoke very fast. It took me a few seconds to respond. "Okay, kiddo." I stopped the car in front of a burger store. Selena immediately opened the door and quickly rushed out of the car. I was both surprised and worried, quickly took off my seatbelt and took my phone into the store. I remember it was almost 12 o'clock at night. Entering the store, there were only a few customers and 2 male employees left. Looking at the service counter, I didn't see Selena there. I looked around the store but couldn't see her. I went to ask the store staff. He said just now a girl wearing the clothes I described came into the bathroom. Maybe she felt uncomfortable, so she wanted to use the bathroom first, I thought. I stood at the service counter ordering a cheeseburger. I know Selena's preferences very well. About 5 minutes later, the burger was being made, but Selena still hadn't appeared. I walked towards the bathroom, stood about 1 meter from the door and called out. Selena did not answer. I continued calling and lost my patience. I approached and knocked on the bathroom door. Suddenly, the door slowly opened. I was surprised to see there was no one inside. I could clearly feel the smell of alcohol still in the bathroom. I went to the service counter. She wasn't there. I grabbed the burger and ran to the car. Selena wasn't in the car either. Returning to the store, I looked around again but still couldn't find my daughter. I asked the staff. They all said they didn't see Selena. One of the 2 employees there said he heard the sound of water being flushed while I was ordering a burger. I started to feel worried and really confused. Selena has never had such strange behavior. I told 2 male employees to let me review the images from the surveillance camera, and they happily agreed. Surveillance camera images show that Selena entered the store and headed towards the bathroom. But since then, she has not appeared again. There were the last few customers I saw at the beginning walking out of the store with a girl. I quickly picked up the phone to call Selena, but she left the phone in the car. I called my wife. She said the girl wasn't home yet. By this time, I was really worried and insecure. Everything happened so quickly and inexplicably that I had no time to react. I returned home and told my wife the whole thing. My wife quickly called the police. That whole night, my husband and I didn't sleep. We consoled each other that Selena was just drunk and fell asleep somewhere. Early the next morning, my husband and I went to Laura's house. Laura said the last time she saw Selena was when I picked her up. Laura was very worried. She said she would contact a few other friends to look for Selena and my husband and I. I announced the bad news to Merlin, which was that her boyfriend was 3 years older than Selena, but he didn't have any worries when he found out. Just like that, my daughter mysteriously disappeared. The police are still actively searching. It's been nearly 3 months and my husband and I never lost hope of finding Selena. I always prayed to God for her safety, but he did not hear my prayers. One morning, the local news channel reported a horrific case. At the young girl's house, they found the body of a man who had been strangled to the point of suffocation. He had bruises all over his body and had many needle punctures. Not only that, the police also discovered the decomposing body of a girl hidden in the attic. The police discovered that the young girl's house contained a lot of drugs and other illegal substances under the bed. My wife and I were dumbfounded. That killer girl was Laura. The man's body was Merlin, my daughter's boyfriend. My wife burst into tears. She looked at me in pain but couldn't say a word. I understood what my wife meant. I was frightened by my speculations in my head. I contacted the police in charge of Selena's disappearance. After investigation, they determined that the decomposing body of the girl in Laura's house was Selena, my daughter. Police said Laura admitted that she and Merlin had been secretly going back and forth behind Selena's back. That birthday party, they had a terrible argument. After all the guests left, Laura, Merlin, and Selena remained to resolve the conflict. In anger, Selena was strangled by Merlin. Laura witnessed my daughter gradually lose her life, but was very happy. They became a couple, often going to Laura's house to have fun and use drugs. In a drunken stupor, Laura strangled Merlin while he slept, and then used a needle to stab Merlin's body multiple times. So the person I picked up that night was Laura. She disguised herself as Selena and created the mysterious disappearance. Why don't I recognize my own daughter? I'm Jason, and these are my 2 hands without fingers. This is the most painful and terrifying experience I've ever had. 10 years ago, I was a sophomore at the University of California, San Diego. I spent my free time working as a freelance deliverer. The job was risky, but it offered flexible hours and helped me cover my living expenses. Occasionally, I'd receive extra tips, which always made me excited. I'd been doing this job for nearly a year when that fateful night occurred. On that day, I didn't go to work. Instead, I spent time working on a presentation for the end of a course. I forgot to update my account on the order receiving website to not accepting orders. Around 10 p.m., my account received a notification about a delivery order. Before I could read all the details, my phone rang unexpectedly from an unknown number. I answered, and on the other end was a woman who wanted me to deliver the package to the specified address by midnight. She emphasized that it was 12 midnight and instructed me to be punctual. Before I could respond, the call ended abruptly. Right after that, the delivery fee was transferred to my account. Seeing the amount, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was 10 times more than my usual orders. Immediately, I forgot about the importance of my presentation. I rushed from my dorm to the location where the orders were gathered. On the package, there was an address and a phone number, but no recipient name. I started the delivery at 10:30 p.m. It was an old but spacious house tucked away in a narrow alley. Checking my watch, it was 11:57, and I stood at the door, ready and alert, not daring to waste a single second. As the clock struck midnight, I immediately rang the doorbell. But before the bell stopped ringing, the door of the house swung open. From inside, an elderly woman stepped out, looking at me with indifferent eyes. She was tall, but her skin was wrinkled and dark, with high cheekbones and sunken features, and her hair was disheveled, some parts long, some short. I politely greeted her and handed her the package. When I presented the delivery slip and asked her to sign to confirm the receipt of the package, she hesitated. Instead of signing, she stared at my hand for a moment before speaking in a deep, hoarse voice that startled me slightly. "Would you stay for dinner with me?" "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am, but Without letting me finish, she handed me $100, saying it was a tip. She promised to pay more if I agreed to have dinner with her and assured me it would only take 20 minutes. I agreed, feeling a bit crazy, but that's what I did at the time. I thought she might be very lonely and in need of companionship. Plus, it wouldn't take much time, and I could go home and continue preparing for tomorrow's presentation. Stepping into the house, everything was rather old but clean and orderly. She invited me to sit at the dining table, where food and utensils were already prepared for two. She went into the kitchen to get something. Wanting to break the silence, I asked her name. "Adela," came the short, indifferent reply. I tried asking a few more questions, but she didn't respond, so I fell silent. A moment later, she emerged, placing a pair of scissors and a gun on the table. I was both surprised and puzzled why dinner would require a gun. Adela placed the package on the table and used the scissors to open it. As soon as the last strip of tape was cut and the box was opened, I felt a horrifying regret for agreeing to dinner with her. The package I had delivered turned out to contain human fingers. Adela poured the blood-stained fingers onto her plate and mine. A chill ran down my spine. My skin crawled and my mind reeled in shock. I was too stunned to speak. Adela gripped the gun tightly and began devouring the fingers voraciously. She looked at me and ordered me to eat. Trembling, I lifted the fork and stabbed at a piece of salad near the fingers. I forced a bite of salad into my mouth, suppressing my urge to retch. The metallic stench of blood overwhelmed me, causing my head to spin. I gagged and clamped my mouth shut, sitting in silence as I watched the terrifying woman devour the fingers on the plate. My body was drenched in sweat, shivering uncontrollably, every cell in me trembling. Adela took a tissue to wipe the blood from her mouth just as the table clock unexpectedly chimed loudly. "The 20-minute dinner is over," Adela's terrifying voice echoed. She pulled out $100 and placed it on the table. Adela then initiated another transaction. She said she would pay me $100,000 if I'd let her eat all 10 of my fingers. "These fingers taste too ordinary. Your fingers look tastier," she said. My heart felt like it was being squeezed. This woman was truly insane. I began to feel uneasy, fully aware of everything around me. But I couldn't control my body anymore. I sat there witnessing the whole process of that insane woman eating my fingers, one by one, without resistance, pain, or screams. I woke up in the hospital with both hands bandaged. I still couldn't control my body. The doctor informed me that all 10 fingertips had been severed. Blood tests revealed I was poisoned with a toxin that rendered my body in a paralyzed state beyond control. A passerby found me in a dire condition by the roadside and brought me to the hospital. As for Adela, she was found dead in that house, choked on bone fragments lodged in her throat. She was infected with a virus that affected her brain and nervous system due to cannibalism. I abandoned my studies and lost a bright future ahead of me. If only I hadn't been consumed by greed and curiosity. I wish I could forget the horrifying images of that night forever. I'm Benny, 31 years old. I'm working as a production manager for one of the 10 largest companies in the US. I've worked very hard to get to my current position, and I really love my job. My company often holds luxurious parties at the end of the year to appreciate employees' contributions throughout the working year. During the party, there will be activities including dining, entertainment, and a charity auction. Last year's end party also had similar activities as every year. This time the company allows employees to bring a relative along. I immediately thought of Donna, my beautiful girlfriend. The party invested by the company was very grand. The venue is a famous local 5-star restaurant. Donna and I arrived at the party greeting everyone. Donna is very excited about everything around her. Knowing my position in the company, she really admired it. I am also confident that I have scored more points in her eyes. The party with the participation of more than 3,000 employees was deafening. I told Donna to follow me closely to avoid getting lost. Around 6:30 p.m. we started the party. Company leaders will give opening remarks. The next part is to honor and reward employees who have made outstanding contributions. When standing on the podium to receive the award, I was very happy to see Donna standing below, clapping her hands and looking at me smiling. At 7 p.m., we started the dining portion. The party format will be buffet. Beautifully decorated and extremely luxurious dishes were served. The LED screen suddenly appeared with a video of the restaurant's chef. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Anthony, the restaurant's executive chef with nearly 30 years of experience. We would like to respectfully introduce to everyone dishes filled with passion, made from Anthony's unique ingredients, wishing everyone a delicious meal. Everyone was very surprised, and I was very impressed with the chef's eyes and smile at the end of the video. It felt like he was trying to convey something. Having the chef personally introduce the dish made us feel appreciated and cared for. This restaurant really knows how to please customers, I whispered in Donna's ear. She smiled happily. Everyone started eating and drinking happily. Donna's food is delicious. She constantly praises the food here. Not only Donna, everyone nodded while eating. I have quite a hard time eating. With unfamiliar foods, I will hesitate to eat them or even be cautious because I have some stomach problems. Seeing everyone's expressions while eating makes me curious about the taste. I took a look around. The dishes here didn't have name tags or any information about the ingredients. This is very strange compared to other 5-star restaurants I've been to. I don't know what the unique ingredient the chef said is. In the end, I chose a dish that was quite similar to steak. The taste of the dish is very strange, but very delicious. The meat is soft and mixed with sauce. I started to get excited and continued to enjoy the next dishes. Suddenly, Donna shouted loudly with joy. She ran up to me boasting that she had found a ring in the dessert. Donna picked up the ring and smiled excitedly. "Benny, I think it's a diamond." I looked at the ring. It was indeed decorated with a diamond-like stone. I and everyone nearby were surprised. Could this be a random lucky gift secretly prepared by the company? But lucky gifts usually won't be placed in dishes like that, which is confusing. I was bewildered, and Donna was very happy to put the ring on her finger. Suddenly, a guy standing not far from us exclaimed, "There are human fingers in the soup!" Everyone who could hear those words immediately turned their gaze towards the guy. Continuously, other strange things appear in food, such as hair, eyelashes, and nails. The surrounding atmosphere was chaotic. People talk endlessly about the food. The company representative requested to meet the restaurant's manager and chef. A loud crash and a girl's scream rang out right behind me and Donna. Everyone was silent. The large bowl of hot soup burst and flowed all over the floor. What made everyone scared and dumbfounded was the human skull with some skin still attached with 2 white eyes rolling on the floor. The hand bones with 5 intact fingers floated right in front of me and Donna. Donna hugged me tightly and fainted. Some people burst into tears, and some older people even had heart attacks. The sounds of vomiting, crying, screaming all created a chaotic scene. It's like the end of the world is coming. We have to try to escape from that cruelty. We didn't say it, but everyone was aware of what they had just eaten. The haunting incident caused the company huge losses when overnight, up to 30% of employees resigned. The horror party from the restaurant was also reported by the national media, and the company's shares fell to a record level. The restaurant's chef was arrested. He's still very proud of what he did. According to the police investigation, the material he said was unique was taken from his wife, who had lived with him for 20 years. He was diagnosed with severe schizophrenia. Donna was so obsessed that she had to undergo psychological treatment at the hospital. Her family was very angry and asked me to stay away from their daughter. I have lost contact with Donna since then. Currently, I still work at the company. Every event organized by the company is also calculated and has very high requirements so that no more unfortunate events would have occurred. I accidentally became an accomplice to a murderer. I'm Ryan, 25, and I live by myself in a cheap apartment in Boston. I didn't go to college. I moved out, got a job, and have been living on my own since I was 18. My family's not rich, so I just didn't want my parents to stress out over me. Even though I still live in the same city, I only visit home occasionally because I'm pretty busy. I used to work a bunch of different jobs before taking a short course in editing and filmmaking. It was my dream since high school, but I ended up giving it up. I was set on becoming a professional cameraman. I bought an expensive camera on installments and started posting my info and work on job sites. I didn't care about the salary. If someone reached out, I'd take the job to improve my skills. After almost a week of posting in all 15 groups, I didn't get any comments, messages, or calls. But I didn't give up. I kept looking for opportunities. And then I came across an article. They didn't require experience in filming, just that you be flexible with your time. And the pay was really generous. It felt like I'd just found the light switch in a dark room. Without hesitation, I texted the account that posted the job ad right away. My message was read within a second. But instead of responding to my greeting and introduction, that person went straight to the request. The visual needs to be sharp, especially at the climax. I thought he might be a guy who creates content for various platforms. This job was trendy at that time and wasn't too hard to do. Maybe he has an idea and needs someone to collaborate with. What kind of content are you working on? Can you do night shoots? Sure, if the content needs it. Can I see the script? I want to prepare as best as I can. 12 a.m., Friday. Last train at Park Street subway station. The conversation didn't seem to flow together. That was the last message he sent, and he wasn't online or active on his personal account after that. Looks like this wasn't even the main account. 3 days later, I was still unsure if the appointment was actually going to happen. On Friday, I kept my eyes glued to my phone. I was really looking forward to this job since I needed the money. Around 10:30 p.m., I fell asleep on the sofa, and when the phone rang, it made me jump like a spring. Are you ready? My sleepy brain was trying to wake up and figure out what was going on. Red jacket, baggy pants, and black shoes. Look for me with this description. I still don't know your name. There was a long beep on the phone before I could finish my sentence. I quickly grabbed my stuff and headed to the meeting place. 11:30 p.m., I got to the subway station. It wasn't too crowded, but it wasn't empty either. It was mostly young people like me. Some were there for dates, some were rushing home, and some just wanted a spot to check their phones. I brought my camera, walked around slowly, and didn't see anyone matching the description the guy gave. After circling around and coming back to where I started, a bright red jacket caught my eye. baggy pants, and black shoes. It had to be him. I approached and he was wearing a huge hat that covered most of his face, plus a black mask. Maybe he didn't want to show his face in the video. I greeted him, but he just kept staring at his wristwatch. "Can I get your name so I know how to address you?" "Get the camera ready and set up in that position." I didn't say anything more and quickly set up the camera. As I looked at him, it hit me that I might be getting caught up in some weird young adult nonsense. He kept checking his watch every 10 seconds, like he was waiting for some important moment. After almost 30 minutes like this, I had no idea what the heck I was doing there anymore. I walked up to him and said, "I need to know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing here." He kept looking at his watch, then stood up and cut me off as he did. "Get to your position and start filming when I give the signal." He quickly headed towards the train tracks. I went back to where I had set up my camera, adjusted the angle a bit, and kept an eye on his every move. He walked while checking his watch and stopped right at the edge of the tracks. He turned towards me, raised his hand to signal, and I pressed the button. That's when my job officially began. The train was coming from behind him with its siren blaring. At that moment, I thought to myself that this dude had some guts. I kept adjusting the angle and making sure it looked right. But then, he turned around and pushed the woman standing next to him. She fell towards the oncoming train, and then dark red blood mixed with pieces of flesh, a strong fishy smell, and screams. The scene was like a horror movie mixed with chaos, almost like something out of a mental hospital. I was frozen, and a few people ran into me in the camera. That guy had disappeared, and I realized I was involved with him. I was helping a murderer. Just like everyone else, I panicked and ran, leaving the camera behind. I sat in my room trembling non-stop as that scene replayed in my mind over and over again. The next few days I just hid in my house, feeling like a disgusting death row inmate. I was certain the police would show up any minute. My camera was left behind, with my fingerprints on it, and it had recorded everything clearly. There were moments when I thought about calling the police, confessing everything, and claiming I had nothing to do with the murderer. But who would believe me? A week passed and nothing happened. I kept up with all the news. The police were still investigating the case, but there was no mention of the camera. Living in constant anxiety left my nerves and body completely drained. This morning, 13 days after that horrible night, I got a package. It was pretty heavy, with my information on it, but no sender details. I opened it up, and it was my camera. There were a few scratches, but it was still in pretty good shape. There was a very thick white envelope inside, packed with cash, a total of $3,000. "You did a great job. The video quality is very clear. Here's your payment. I'll need you for upcoming projects." Looking at the old, crumpled bills, I wondered if I had become his accomplice. I need to move, now, but I have to report this to the police. I can't let these dirty, scary things mess up my future. My name is Merlin. I'm 26 years old. I love driving interstate. I spend a few days a month doing it. I love the feeling of driving and hitting the roads, especially at night. Does anyone else share the odd hobby as me? But I gave up that hobby. I almost paid the price of my own life. That night, I was driving back home in Florida. When I reached the deserted highway in Georgia, it was already 10 p.m. It was still 4 hours to get home, so I decided to drive through the night. I could return home at dawn and take a rest. Well, things didn't go as planned. After just a short drive, my tire acted up. I didn't have a spare tire because I'd already used it on the trip. That was bad luck, and I was a bit frustrated and disappointed. Looking around, I felt pretty lucky to be right in front of a motel. This motel had a sign with a cute pink LED light. I went inside. 2 men were drinking together in the reception area. I said hi and asked for the owner of the motel, and they just looked at me like they didn't know what was going on. The man sitting inside the counter pointed at me. "You forgot to pull something up." I was surprised and looked down at my zipper, and right away the 2 guys started laughing. They must have been pretty drunk. I didn't care, so I just asked again about the motel owner. The guy at the counter got up and introduced himself as the manager. He said the motel owners were an older couple who were out traveling. His name was Roger. The other was Otis. I told him I wanted to rent a room, and I pulled out some cash and put it on the table. He took the money, but then handed me a beer and said I should have a drink. I couldn't refuse, so I drank it all. When they saw me turning my beer upside down, the 2 guys started laughing again. I told Roger to give me the key because I was tired. He said I had to pay up front, without any hesitation. I was a little annoyed, telling Roger that I had given him the money a few minutes ago. Roger looked surprised, denied taking my money, and then turned to ask Otis again to make sure he was right. I angrily asked to see the motel's security footage. The 2 men laughed again. Roger gave me the key to room 202. "Just kidding, man." I took the key and went to my room, feeling frustrated. The motel was pretty dusty, like it hadn't been cleaned in a few days. I guess it was partly because of the highway. There was a faint smell, probably coming from the trash bag in the hallway. When I walked into the room, I felt a bit let down, but I didn't have any other option. Pulled out my laptop, checked the hotel's website, and gave it a 1-star rating. This made me feel a bit more at ease. There were quite a few bad reviews from guests, but most of them were from people who stayed here a few days ago. I left my backpacks on the bed and went to take a shower. Another hassle was having to share the bathroom. While I was in the shower, I heard a weird noise. I turned off the faucet and shouted loudly. It turned out to be Roger. He said that the bathroom door here was old and could get stuck. If it couldn't be opened, push it a little harder. I took a quick shower, and when I opened the door, it was actually stuck. I followed Roger's advice and gave it a good push. The door opened easily, and I lost my balance, stumbling right into Roger. Roger burst out laughing. It turned out he was just playing a silly joke. I couldn't help but curse. I told Roger that was a silly joke. At first, Roger was smiling, but his face quickly changed to a look of annoyance. He looked at me like a tiger about to pounce on its prey.
"You're really upset and intending to give us a 1-star rating, right?"
His words and his voice sounded like a growling beast, made me shiver. I didn't say anything else and quickly went back to my room. This manager seemed weird. He mentioned a 1-star review on the motel's website. He must be used to it by now. I browsed the web for a while until 1 a.m. I shut down my computer, turned off the lights, and went to bed. I'm not sure how long it took, but I woke up to a buzzing sound and then quickly fell back asleep. In the morning, I called for car maintenance right away. I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. While packing up, I realized I'd left my clothes in the bathroom last night, so I went to grab them. I took a wrong turn down a hallway, and it led me to a terrible secret. The further I went, the stronger the stench got. I thought I was heading to the garbage area, so I turned back. When I got to the door of a room, the creaking of the hinges was deafening. The door opened to a horrible smell and a bunch of flies. I looked inside the room, and there were bodies of a man and a woman standing next to each other. They looked old, and their bodies were really decomposed. I didn't say anything or scream. My throat just felt tight. I didn't care about yesterday's clothes anymore. I just had to get out of there immediately. Thank God when I got back to the room, I grabbed my backpack and headed straight to the parking lot. But then Roger suddenly showed up and blocked my way. "Are you going to leave without saying goodbye?" I just stood there staring at him, completely confused. My brain couldn't process anything. "I really like your CK blue underwear." I still couldn't say anything. It was true that I had worn those underwear to bed last night. But how did that crazy guy know? Roger laughed loudly at my confusion and came closer. I rushed to the car and locked the door. I thought to myself, I need to call the police, as I frantically searched for my phone. Roger stood outside, holding my phone and laughing happily. He held a baseball bat in one hand, threatening me to get out of the car. The creep kept hitting me hard, targeting the car I was still making payments on. I could only pray to God and he heard me. The car company employees I called in the morning showed up, and Roger took off as soon as he saw them. I told an employee to quickly call the police. 10 minutes later, a police car showed up with 3 policemen. They caught Roger later that day, and the horrifying truth came out. He was actually a guest at the motel, not the manager like he'd claimed. He knew everything I did because of a hidden camera in the air vent. That's also why I heard that buzzing sound in the middle of the night. But the camera wasn't Roger's. It belonged to the motel owner. He installed it to spy on guests. Roger was also a victim and found out everything. To silence Roger, he kept him locked up for days. Getting boxed in, Roger ended up killing the owner and his wife, and then stayed at the motel for the past 10 days, pretending to be the manager. After everything was investigated, I was finally allowed to go home. But the scene of that old couple still haunts me to this day, and ever since that night, I've lost my taste for driving across stage. I'm Isaac, 33 years old. I have a happy family with my wife Rachel, 29 years old, and our 5-year-old son named Jim. I have been living away from my family since I went to college, while Rachel has been an orphan since childhood. Our house is always filled with laughter from Jim's innocence, liveliness, and affection. Like other children, Jim has 2 imaginary friends named Anna and Julian. Jim always tells funny stories about him and his 2 friends for us to hear. Rachel doesn't like those stories and always creates opportunities for Jim to interact with real-life friends. Last summer, our family visited the orphanage where Rachel used to live as a child. I suggested to my wife that we stay at the orphanage for a few summer months so that both of us could rest and spend more time with Jim. Jim would have many friends to play with while my wife and I would assist the caregivers here. My wife was hesitant about this proposal. She thought about it for a long time and seemed unsure when I asked her again later on. Finally, Rachel agreed with the proposal. Jim was very happy to live here. He quickly made friends, which reassured us greatly. The principal arranged a private place for us that was clean and tidy. In the morning, while we were happily eating breakfast together, Jim introduced me and Rachel to his 2 new friends, Joey and Leon, whom he had just met recently. They would all become a group of 5 happy friends along with Anna and Julian. Although Jim had many other friends outside the orphanage now, but he couldn't forget his imaginary ones. Rachel was surprised when she heard Jim mention the names of his new friends again. She asked about the one named Leon once more. I was also surprised by her reaction, so I asked what was wrong. She laughed it off, saying it sounded like someone she once knew. One evening it got late, but I heard faint whispers from Jim's room. It surprised me because usually by this time every day, he would already be asleep. so I quickly went to check on him. When pushing open the door into his room, I saw Jim sitting there, staring at the wall in front of him, whispering, as if telling a fairy tale they used to read before bedtime. I gently called out his name. He turned around, smiling at me. He held my hands, introducing me to his newfound friend named Leon. I felt both confused and creeped out, as there was no one else in the room except for Jim and me. Jim told me to greet Leon politely because he was waving at me, pointing towards the wall in front of us and innocently saying so. Feeling a bit embarrassed, I followed his instructions. I asked Jim about Leon's appearance, and after thinking for a while, he replied, "I'm not sure, Dad. He is wearing a bag on his head. I can only see his blue eyes." Jim's innocence made me scared and worried. Was Jim really seeing someone that I couldn't see? Or could there be some mental issue with him? I comforted Jim to go to sleep and then returned to my room. The next day, Jim sat on the chair diligently drawing a picture. When he finished it, he happily ran back to show it to Rachel and me. The painting depicted 5 little friends standing side by side, holding hands happily. In the middle was a boy wearing a bag on his head. Before I could ask more about the painting, Rachel snatched it away forcefully with an angry expression on her face. She kept asking Jim where he met the strange boy with the bag on his head. What did that boy say? Jim cried out of fear, so I quickly snatched away my wife's hand and hugged our son tightly. I knew Rachel hated Jim's imaginary stories. After Rachel calmed down eventually, she gently apologized to Jim and embraced him lovingly. Her gentle approach made Jim feel more comfortable, and he began telling us. Jim said that he met that strange boy named Leon in art class at the orphanage. He sat alone at the last desk in class. He introduced himself as Leon. Leon said that he felt very lonely because nobody wanted to play with him. Jim wanted to take off Leon's bag so that he could see his face clearly, but Leon refused. Leon said that his face was very ugly, so he didn't want anyone to see it. I noticed Rachel slowly losing her composure through Jim's every word. She tightly gripped the boy's shoulders, staring into Jim's eyes with wide eyes, emphasizing each word. She demanded that Jim stop playing with Leon, effective now, and instructed him clearly not to believe anything that Leon said. Jim was frightened and started crying. I was uncomfortable with Rachel's baseless control, so I took Jim away to calm her down. That evening, Rachel went to Jim's bedroom in an attempt to make things as happy and close as they used to be. On another occasion, during a happy family dinner, Jim seemed sad and ate less than usual. When questioned by Rachel, he looked up at me with teary eyes and said hesitantly, "I'm not your real son. I was brought from somewhere else." My wife and I were shocked. How could he know this? I comforted Jim, telling him it wasn't true, while Rachel assured him that whoever said it was lying. "Leon is a good friend. He would never lie to me," remarked Jim. Seeing Rachel getting angry at the mention of Leon's name, I quickly tried to soothe her and asked her to leave us alone. I was very stressed during that time. I understand that Jim is experiencing psychological changes and becoming increasingly curious about everything around him, while Rachel is losing her composure in raising her child. Jim was not our biological child. He was adopted from this very orphanage. However, no one except my wife and I knew that. We plan to disclose this to Jim when he is old enough. I'm really curious about Jim's new imaginary friend, Leon. In the following days, my wife and I spent more time with our son, caring for and encouraging him. Children tended to forget easily because Jim never mentioned it again after that. It's almost Jim's 6th birthday soon, and my wife and I were planning a celebration. We're organizing a grand party for Jim and inviting everyone from the orphanage to join us. On the day of the party, everything was perfect, except for the absence of Jim. I asked Rachel to go upstairs to call him down, while I stayed below to attend to our guests. She left, but took a long time to return. Looking at the clock, we were past due for the main part of the celebration. I quickly went upstairs to search for them both. As I reached their room, I heard Rachel calling out from inside the bathroom in distress. Hastily opening the door for her, I asked her what happened. She just urgently told me to find Jim quickly. Fear stretched on her face. I didn't understand what was happening, but at that moment, my main concern was my son. I searched everywhere, but couldn't find him. An overwhelming sense of dread began consuming me. When I encountered Rachel standing outside a storage shed, was staring into it in utter terror. I talked to Rachel about Jim's disappearance, and we immediately called the police. The birthday party was canceled. For 3 months, 2 of us worked with the police, but couldn't find Jim. I saw Rachel's despair because I knew how much she loved our son. I would hold Rachel tight every night as she cried herself to sleep. We have a few more days before we have to leave. Rachel hired a psychic. Rachel said she would do whatever it takes to find her son. Otherwise, she couldn't leave in peace. After performing the ritual, the psychic came to us. She looked at Rachel for a long time and said that Jim had died on his 6th birthday. My wife knows best where Jim was. I turned to look at Rachel. At that very moment, I truly suspected her having a hand on her son's demise. Rachel looked at me, then back to the psychic, with a panicked expression, and then she ran away very quickly. I chased after Rachel, but no matter how much I called, she wouldn't turn back. Rachel stood in front of the shed door, her eyes now filled with dread. Rachel trembled as she pushed aside all the items blocking the door and opened it. Inside the dark shed, a tiny figure lay on the floor, and the horrifying stench permeated through the air. I couldn't dare think further. My body was too stiff to move. Rachel ran to the decaying body, which was the boy wearing a cloth sack, just as Jim had described. But this cloth had a reddish-brown stain. Rachel removed the sack over, and Jim's disfigured face was revealed. She cried out in despair while I collapsed. Jim was determined to have died from severe trauma from head concussion and brain hemorrhage. After Jim's funeral, I confronted Rachel on what had happened on Jim's birthday. Before the party started, Jim repeatedly begged Rachel to invite Leon to his birthday. Rachel couldn't control her emotions and gave Jim a painful slap. Then she tearfully went downstairs to welcome the guests, leaving Jim alone. When Rachel went upstairs to call for Jim, she saw a boy with a cloth sack over his head standing there. As Rachel approached him, he forcefully pushed her into the bathroom and locked the door behind her. When I went up and opened the door for Rachel, she did not rush off to find Jim, but instead looked for that boy with a cloth sack over his head. Rachel saw a dark figure at the warehouse door. As she tried running towards it, the door suddenly slammed shut. Under such force, the furniture outside fell over, blocking it completely. Rachel kept thinking about that dark figure until I arrived. Rachel inadvertently contributed to Jim's death. I asked her about the one named Leon, when every time Jim mentioned about him, she acted very strange. She burst into tears, saying it was a thoughtless action back when she was in the orphanage. She used to pick on and isolate a kid named Leon because of his long scar across his face. She made him wear a cloth sack to cover his ugly face. One time, she and her cronies went overboard and accidentally suffocated Leon with it. I couldn't be able to look Rachel in the eyes after knowing all this. I love my wife very much, but can't forget all these cruel things she has done. Every time I see her, it reminds me of my pain from losing my son, Jim. My name's Anna, 24 years old. I've just started working in a small firm in San Francisco. My job was a customer service representative. I lived alone in my apartment some 20 minutes away from my work. My boyfriend lived in that same city as I was, but due to our conflicting schedules, we could only see each other on weekends. My first week in the new company was pretty uneventful. Everything was good. In my office, I met my two newest colleagues, Alice and Oliver. They're pretty nice, friendly, and generous. On the last weekday, we decided to have a night out after finishing the weekly workload. Alice told me that it's to celebrate my first week in the office, so needless to say, I couldn't say no to that. Even if I did have a plan with my boyfriend already. So I told him about that and had to readjust our own plan for the weekend. After work, we arrived to a nightclub not far from our workplace. To be honest, I hated being here. The music was too loud that we literally need to scream just to say anything. Also, the flashing lights were very discomfortingly annoying. That's just me and my feeling. Though I know that bars and clubs were a rather popular destination, but I think it wasn't for me. I didn't remember for how long I was there. The cocktails was surely no friend with my empty stomach. I don't feel so good, guys, I told Alice and Oliver. The two colleagues happily left with me, even though I knew clearly that they still wanted to have more fun. Leaving the bar, all I wanted to do was to go home. Yet Oliver had another proposal. "We haven't got dinner yet, right?" He then suggested a restaurant that specialized in foie gras. Alice immediately voted for it excitedly. I, however, upon checking the time, wondering what restaurant was still open at 10 p.m. "That restaurant serves overnight, gal," he said. Two of them kind of dragged me into it, and there was no way for me to say no. The voyage there was kind of long and uneventful. It was the constant nagging of a hungry Alice pushing Oliver to drive faster. And me, I was just too tired to say anything. I just wanted to get over it quickly so I could go to bed. It's exactly midnight when Oliver stopped his ride in front of a small restaurant deep in the back alleys. A gentleman greeted us on our way. He introduced himself as Joey, a jack of all trade for this small establishment. Interesting. The restaurant was kinda neat, though the three of us were the only customers here. After settling down, Oliver asked for the restaurant's signature dish, while Alice was busy with choosing the beverage section. Two of them continued with their usual office gossip. Alice, since she wouldn't be driving, enjoyed her drink, while I was at my limit for alcohol consumption today. My phone rang. It was my boyfriend calling me. I went outside the restaurant for some privacy. My boyfriend was pretty worried, wondering when I would go home and whether I needed a ride. Talking with him, feeling his care, filled me with joy. Then I darted my eyes around, seeing a girl dressed in white sitting across the alleyway. Saying goodbye to my darling, I came over to check on her. She kept staring into the green shrub. Her eyes widened worriedly. "Are you all right, miss?" I asked. I'm looking for something of mine." Her voice was somewhat odd. It was very quiet, with a hint of a slight echo. I asked her whether she needed my help finding it, and she declined, saying she's going to find it soon. Seeing I was not needed, I said goodbye to her and went back inside. By the time I returned, Oliver and Alice was kinda tipsy. "What's a handsome boss like you doing here all alone?" Alice, inebriated, made a joke toward the restaurant owner. "Well, I had a few other female staff, but recently they'd left without any solid reasons, and I am still looking for their replacement. You see, I only hire female staffs." His answer made Alice laugh. She clearly enjoyed the conversation. "Well, I'm Alice, and is there any vacancy here for me?" "You're quite all right, Alice, but your friend seems to be a better candidate." The man then glanced at me, lowering down the dish on the table. His smirk gave me the creeps. I shuddered at that glance. Oliver laughed at the scene as if he had sensed my uneasiness. Seeing my hands were not very clean, I went to the bathroom to wash it before the meal. There, I suddenly heard a woman, seemed like she was crying. "Who's there? Is everything okay?" In the stall was a young girl, turning her back on me, burying her face into her hands, crying a lot. It seemed that she's wearing a waitress uniform of this restaurant. "Is everything okay, miss?" Hearing me, she stopped crying, then slowly turned around to me. Suddenly, she lifted her face up, arms stretched toward me. Startled by her sudden movement, I quickly turned from surprise to terror once seeing her face up close. Her face was torn to pieces, with exposed flesh hanging open everywhere, and her eye sockets were empty. All over her body, there was crimson red fluid soaking through the clothes. "Bring it back to me! Bring it back!" She tried to reach to me, crying in pain. I quickly booked out of the restroom, rushed over to my two coworkers. I told them what happened, yet they were not buying it. When the three of us arrived at the scene, the woman was nowhere to be found. Alice and Oliver laughed out loud, telling me that I've drunken too much tonight. But I wasn't drunk at all. To be fair, I was more sober than the two of them. Back to our table, we didn't see the owner there anymore. Alice told me to quickly eat up to leave this establishment. But as soon as I sat down on the table, I felt unease from a staring woman on another table. This was the white outfit woman I saw outside earlier. "Have you found it yet?" I asked. "Almost there," she answered. "What happened, Anna? Who are you talking to?" Oliver, eyebrows raised, opened up to me. I told him that I had seen that woman a while ago, and now she's in the diner with us. Alice and Oliver laughed, claiming that I was joking around because there's nobody there. But I swore that she was still there, still staring at me across the diner. "I have found it. That's my liver." The woman, crying out loud, pointed her finger into the piece of meat on my dish. Her words frightened me to the point that I literally dropped the dish off the table. Alice and Oliver was dumbfounded by what happened. They could only look at me worryingly. At the same time, the tattered woman from the restroom came over crying, "Give me back my body!" Both women rushed into me, yelling out a blood-curdling scream. That's it. My flight response overwhelmed me. I screamed and did all that I could to get out of that damned restaurant. A taxi flashing its headlight toward me when I was trying to run away. In my head, all the frightening scenes crashed back before it all turned to darkness. When I came to my senses, I was in the hospital with my worried boyfriend and two concerned colleagues. When asked about what happened there at the restaurant, I said nothing. I just wanted to forget all those scary things. A week later, I was discharged from the hospital. It was when I heard from Oliver that the restaurant owner had recently passed away. His body was discovered to be disemboweled, with all internal organs being forcefully removed. The only evidence they found at the scene was a chef knife that only had his fingerprints on it. Maybe I was the only person knowing what terrible thing had happened there to the female staffs. And you know what? I think he deserved it. I once received a package with a body inside. I'm Victor. I'm 27, and I work as an IT engineer. I make a pretty decent living. I've got a girlfriend who usually comes over to my place on the weekends and stays the night. My apartment's in a small building that's not super modern, but the rent is pretty reasonable. I could afford to move to a nicer place, but I'm fine with where I'm at. My neighbors are pretty friendly. Basically, we just say hello when we see each other, maybe lend a few small household items and keep to ourselves. That's all I need from my neighbors, and luckily, that's exactly what I've got. But there's one exception. He lives in the opposite apartment and is around my age. He's not nosy or anything, but his actions do bother me and others. He doesn't have a stable job, and he spends all day doing silly stuff, filming it and posting it on social media. When he sees people reacting and commenting, he laughs out loud. His jokes are pretty loud and end up bothering everyone around him. One time, the hallway was filled with foam crumbs. They ended up blowing into my apartment and my neighbor's place next door. It even got in my throat while I was walking and talking on the phone. That was from one of his ridiculous challenges. I don't mean to judge anyone or their job, but in his case, he's causing trouble and discomfort for more than just me. He's asked me to be a guest on his challenge many times, but at that time it was 11 p.m. I was in my pajamas, and I couldn't have looked more annoyed. After that, I was really busy with work and wasn't home much. One afternoon, I had a dinner date with my girlfriend, so we decided to spend some time together. When I got back to my apartment, there was a huge package blocking the entrance to our garage. I didn't remember ordering anything, so I got out of the car and went over to check out the package. It was addressed to that neighbor who's always causing trouble, and it said it was a returned package. That meant he had sent the package, and for some reason, it was returned. I figured he bought the equipment for his video shoot. I moved it aside to clear the way for the car to get into the garage, and the package was insanely heavy. He must have bought a whole cow. I accidentally let go of it, and the package fell to the ground. There was a sound like plastic breaking. I was a bit panicked, but I quickly brushed it off. I figured I'd just tell him it was the carrier's fault, and that would be the end of it. I left the package next to the garage door, where it was covered by the roof. My girlfriend had just arrived, so we went inside, cooked together, and had a nice peaceful evening. The next morning we drove to work. As I passed the garage door, I was a bit surprised to see his package still there. Oh well, he'd see it anyway. I had a new project and was busy at work for 3 days straight. When I got back to the apartment after 3 days, I found the package still there. The cardboard box underneath was damp and a bit dented. I smelled something bad while I was still in the car. Someone in the building asked me, "Have you seen Dennis?" "I was at work. I just got home today," I said. "The bad smell has been there for a few days. Everyone's busy at work like me, so they don't notice. I have to deal with it by myself." I decided to deal with the package first. My neighbor was probably off doing some challenge somewhere. He'd been away from home for days like this a few times before. In the afternoon, after getting some rest, I grabbed scissors, gloves, and a bunch of large plastic bags and headed to the garage. The package was now leaking a red liquid, and it was swarming with flies. I wore 2 masks, but the smell was so strong it almost made me throw up a few times. I was fed up with dealing with the fallout from his ridiculous challenges, and now I had to clean up this mess from my neighbor. It had to be food he ordered to use later, which is why it smelled so awful. When I sliced the tape open, I saw a clear plastic box with something inside that I couldn't quite identify, but there were tons of maggots mixed in with some cloth. I tore off another piece of cardboard from the carton, bent down to take a closer look, and was met with the sight of a face being eaten away by thousands of wriggling creatures. I screamed and immediately called the police. 10 minutes later, the police showed up, took the package right away, and asked me to come down to the station to give a statement. After the forensic results came in, they concluded that the body in the package was my neighbor. He had died from suffocation. Another friend who often helped him with filming videos went to the police station to make a report. 2 weeks ago, he took on a new challenge. He was going to turn himself into a package and travel across the states. He packed some dry food, waste bags, and climbed into a plastic box. In the beginning, he still kept in touch with his friend and mentioned how much he was enjoying it. He could feel the shaking whenever the truck was moving. His friend was busy with work and forgot about it. The most unfortunate thing happened to this guy, who was way too young. The price he paid for his recklessness was just too scary. I hope no one else becomes a victim of pointless pranks, especially kids, with social media being what it is today.